Hello, my friends. Usually when I write about works of literature on my blog, people ask me, does this book exist in an English translation? And very often I have to say, no, it doesn't, I'm sorry. And people get disappointed because they're excited about some of the works of literature that I describe in my blog posts. And then they discover that they will not be able to read these books in English, and that's very disappointing. So today I'm going to talk to you about a book by a contemporary Ukrainian writer. His name is Volodymyr Rafeyenko. And good news, his most famous book has recently been translated into English by the Harvard School of Ukrainian Studies, which is the largest center of Ukrainian studies in North America. Today, I want to talk about the author himself a little bit. I was just now in an event where Volodymyr Rafeyenko appeared with another important Ukrainian writer that I'm going to talk about at a later occasion. And it was an amazing event. I learned so much, but the event was in Ukrainian. And so I'm not going to give you any links because it doesn't make sense. I think it's best that I retell to you what I found out at that event. So Volodymyr Rafeyenko is a Ukrainian writer who is from the Donbass region of Ukraine. This is the region that was invaded by Russia in 2014. Volodymyr Rafeyenko in 2014 was living in Donetsk, a major city in the Donbass, where I have several of my family members right now. And he was a completely Russian-speaking person and a completely Russian-speaking Ukrainian writer. As many Ukrainians, he was a native speaker of Russian. He spoke no Ukrainian at all, none, zero. And didn't have any problems in Ukraine not speaking Ukrainian because we are bilingual. Ukraine is a bilingual country, and that's perfectly fine. His college degree was actually in Russian studies, and he dedicated his life to creating literature in Russian. When in 2014, the Donbass region was invaded by Russians, and the Russians occupied Donetsk, the city where this writer lived with his family, he had to escape the region immediately because, as we know very well, it doesn't really matter to the Russian invaders what language anybody speaks. Rafeyenko at that point was an important, well-known Ukrainian writer. And by that fact itself, by having contributed to the Ukrainian cultural space, but by the creation of literature and art in Ukrainian, he was already in terrible danger. And in a later video, I'm going to tell you what happened to some of the writers, Russian-speaking, completely Russian-speaking writers, who did not escape from the Donbass on time in 2014, 2015, and the horrible things that befell them. So Rafeyenko did escape from Donetsk in the very first days of the Russian invasion of 2014. He went to Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. He was so stunned and horrified by the invasion of the Russian troops and the horrible devastation that they brought to his native city and to the region where he had spent his whole life, that he decided to switch into Ukrainian. At that point, he did not speak a single word of Ukrainian. And but he decided to learn the language, start speaking and start writing in the language. The linguistic issue is complicated in that region of Ukraine because Rafeyenko tells, for example, that both his parents in the Donbass were 100% Russian speaking. However, all of his grandparents in the Donbass were 100% Ukrainian speaking. So this is the forced Russification that happened in the eastern and southeastern Ukraine within living memory. This happened within the generation of Rafeyenko's appearance, and the same happened to me in the generation of my mother. My grandparents in the Donbass area were 100% Ukrainian speakers. My mother grew up in a small Ukrainian village in the Lugansk region in the Donbass, 100% Ukrainian speaker, but she had to switch to Russian in adulthood in order to be able to access higher education, have a good job. And so now what we're seeing in Ukraine, people are trying to effectuate a move in the opposite direction. People who were happy speaking Russian their whole lives, but so horrified by what they have seen Russians perpetrate in Ukraine, that the very language that they have spoken their whole lives, the Russian language, is now intolerable to them. And they're trying to switch into Ukrainian. For Volodymyr Rafeyenko, this was a difficult process. It is not easy to switch into a different language in adulthood, to put it very mildly. It is a very, very complicated, fraught, painful process. Rafeyenko wrote a novel, Monday Green, that I showed you earlier, about these experiences of a Ukrainian who escapes from the Donbass in 2014 and who decides to switch into Ukrainian, and how complicated this whole process is, because language is not just a collection of grammar rules and vocabulary lists. Language is culture. Language is everything. It's a whole world of meanings, connotations, jokes, different shades of meaning that we invest into every single cultural reference in the language, every little quote from our favorite movies, cartoons, books, everything. And so switching into a different language means switching into a different universe, into a different galaxy of cultural references, of imagery, of everything. It's very, very hard. Rafeyenko wrote his novel about those experiences of the post 2014 invasion of Russia into Ukraine. Now, what happened is that on the eve of this new invasion of Russia in Ukraine on February 24th, 2022, Rafeyenko was living in the area that's close to this, like the suburbs of Kiev. The suburbs is not entirely a very good analogy, but it's an area close to Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. And he was living, it so happens, between the little towns of Bucha and Borodyanka. These are the places that we now know as the places of the terrible massacres and genocide conducted by the Russians when they conquered these little towns and held them under their occupation for weeks. When Russians came to Bucha and Borodyanka, the writer, Volodymyr Rafeyenko, he managed to escape again. So see, it's the second time the Russians come, he has to escape again. The Russians come again, he has to escape with his family. And Rafeyenko is not very young, so he's not fighting military age at all. And so had to escape from those regions again. Since then, Bucha and Borodyanka have been liberated by the Ukrainian army, and Rafeyenko has been able to talk to some of his neighbors who had remained there and who survived, and they told them the horrific stories of what was done to some of the residents, families with little children who could not escape in time, who did not want to escape in time, people who could not for a second imagine or did not believe that the Russians were going to perpetrate horrific genocide against citizens of a neighboring nation. And so Rafeyenko's novel that has been translated into English is titled Mondegreen. Mondegreen is a term that was invented, I think, in the 1950s, if I'm not mistaken, by an American writer, Sylvia Wright. And Sylvia Wright was telling about this experience that she had as a child when her parents read her a ballad, a poem, and she was a small child, so she did not understand some of the words in the ballad, and she substituted them with her own. And so what the ballad actually was saying at some point was, laid him on the green. And for her, laid him on the green meant nothing because she was a child. She didn't know what the green could mean as a geographic location. And she heard this part of the poem, laid him on the green, as Lady Mondegreen. And so she thought that there was a character called Lady Mondegreen appearing in the poem. And so the poem had a completely different meaning to her. We have all, I think, had that experience where we mishear usually a song, right, or a poem, and we think that we heard something that is not there. And for us, the lyrics of the poem or a line from a movie mean something different than what it's supposed to mean. And I want everybody right now to think about this experience, right? When you spend a decade thinking that this is what my favorite song says, and then you actually read the lyrics and it says something completely different. So this is Mondegreen. There is now a term for this, substitution of a line or an expression with something that sounds similar but means something else. And the official term for that is Mondegreen. And this is the term that the Ukrainian writer Volodymyr Rafeyenko used as a title to his novel. Before I talk about the novel, I want to talk about some of the ideas that the writer expressed about, and again, as I said at the beginning, this is somebody with a degree in Russian studies, somebody who has spent his life as a Russian language author, somebody with a very, very good, profound knowledge and understanding of the Russian culture and the Russian language, and somebody who until quite recently profoundly loved and appreciated the Russian culture and the Russian language, but also always perceived that there were some motifs, some things that kept cropping up in the Russian art that were kind of scary. And so Rafeyenko says that at the heart of Russian art, and let's take literature specifically, at the heart of Russian literature, there is the idea of a sacred crime. So there's an idea of a transgression that breaks human laws, but in a way it is, even if it's a transgression that is really vile and that's really horrific, that it carries some sort of a profoundly redemptive capacity if the person who is breaking the law, if the person who is transgressing either the human or the divine law, is a sort of a superior human being. We have seen, for example, the most obvious example of this is Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, right? The whole novel is about that, who is entitled to breaking the greatest human and divine law, which is thou shalt not kill. And but this also crops up in so many different works of Russian literature. For example, when we look at the great Russian writer of the 20th century, early 20th century, Mikhail Bulgakov, in 1925, he published his amazing, brilliant, beautiful short novel, The Heart of the Dog, Собачье сердце. And in that novel, which is beautifully written, we have a talented scientist who's a genius scientist. And he's the good guy in the novel, clearly, if you read the novel. He's a good guy who really hates the arrival of the Soviet regime, and the Soviet regime is completely alien to his world, to his understanding of um, the world, everything that's good in the world. But at the same time, this very positive character, the genius, scientific genius, the kind of science he does, and this is mentioned obliquely in the novel, but it is there. The kind of science he does has to do with providing medical treatments to elderly people so that they can engage in sexual activities with much younger people, including children. So this is kind of just mentioned in passing in the novel a couple of times. And later on in the novel, this character conducts an experiment that is today we would call transhumanist, turning an animal into a human being and then turning that human being back into an animal. Just pretty horrible things, right? Assisting pedophiles, transhumanism. But at the same time, the novel invites us to identify with this character and see him as supremely positive. And the word supremely is not accidental here because we're talking precisely about this approach that, as Rafeyenko is saying, is at the heart of the Russian art, that some people who are just superior, they are allowed a little bit more than other people. So there is something that makes some of us superior to others. And if we're superior, it should be okay for us to transgress the human and the divine laws because we have a sacred purpose. So this, messianic perception of the Russian culture as being entitled to more because of its special nature. So I can commit crimes, I can do things that other people are not allowed to do because I am so special, because I have a special mission. This idea of the special, mysterious Russian soul that is not the center of the Russian literature and has been forever, that there is some mystery inside the Russian culture that allows Russian people to transgress. Has been there for a long time. Again, talking about Mikhail Bulgakov, the great Russian writer, in 1937, he wrote his magnum opus, his masterpiece, Master and Margarita, brilliant novel. Again, he's a very talented writer, such as Dostoevsky. These are geniuses, very, very talented authors. And so in that later novel by Bulgakov, the most positive character in the novel is the Satan. And so the Satan in the novel, and you can read it, does exist in English translation, the Satan comes to Moscow. This is Stalinist Moscow. And the Satan is such a charming, kind, good Satan that, again, just like in the novel about the genius scientist, you kind of really warm up to him, you identify with him. Interestingly, that in that novel, Jesus Christ also appears as a character. And honestly, compared to the depiction of the Satan, Jesus Christ is quite pathetic in the novel. Like he's good. He's really, capable of performing miracles, etc. But he is presented at such a disadvantage with the eminently charming and all-powerful Satan that you kind of start asking yourself, what is the message that the novel is sending? Interestingly, Bulgakov was Stalin's favorite writer. Stalin admired him in secret because Bulgakov was a modernist. It was not possible for Bulgakov to be openly accepted as a great writer in the USSR in the 1930s. But I can imagine that a novel about an attractive, personable, good Satan would have been very pleasing to Stalin because, why not? He must have really identified with the protagonist. So the Ukrainian writer, Volodymyr Rafeyenko, when he looks at this really, really long-term foundation of the Russian culture that believes in there being something special in the Russian soul, in the Russian character, that entitles the Russian people to more, entitles the Russian people to doing things that other people are not allowed to do. We start understanding the nature of today's war of Russia and Ukraine so much better. And Rafeyenko says, I think so well and so brilliantly, he says that it is wrong to say that this is Putin's war. This is not Putin's war. Putin is the product of the Russian people. Putin exists because the Russian people wanted him and they want to see him in power. There are rare exceptions. However, the overwhelming, the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times in Russia is that of what we're seeing today in Ukraine. It's this highly militarized, highly aggressive, rabid, I would say, hatred for everything that is not Russian, and the desire to destroy any other culture, even if it's completely Russian speaking, but if it exists in Ukraine, if it exists in Belarus, if it exists in Moldova, it has to be destroyed, eradicated, because the people of Russia right now, once again, in the moment of committing their sacred crime that they believe is going to be justified by the higher power. And what their higher power is, I think we could all find out from reading Russian literature from times past. I was in this meeting, in this event that I attended with Volodymyr Rafeyenko. I was really stunned, first of all, by how great his Ukrainian language is, because again, this is somebody who learned another language in adulthood. This is very hard, how well he speaks. I was also stunned by how profound his analysis is. This is somebody, because it's very difficult to understand events when you're in the midst of them, because things are happening and the first reaction is often emotional, an emotional response. And this is a person who has now been displaced twice. Rafeyenko had to escape from the Donbass, and then he had to escape from the Kiev region. And again, this is very hard because the person has to drop everything. He said that he escaped from Donetsk in 2014 with just 2 little bags. He couldn't bring anything with him. Then there was a whole very difficult problem, how to bring out his family, how to bring out his elderly mother. Finally, he finds a place in the Kiev region, starts, working, setting up his life. And again, just a few years later, has to abandon everything, run away. He and his family are now in the Western Ukraine. But it's difficult. And Rafeyenko is saying that he's writing a novel right now about this war, the current invasion of Russia and Ukraine. It's difficult because as one of Ukraine's leading writers, he's in huge demand to write articles, to do appearances, to talk to people, to explain what's happening. And he's constantly has to write, and it's difficult to have time and leisure for his art. And I think it's very encouraging that his previous novel, Mondegreen, has been translated into English. I don't want this video to go on forever, so I'm going to talk about the actual novel by Rafeyenko in the next video. Here, I just wanted to give you some background and start a conversation about contemporary Ukrainian literature. And my goal especially is to let people know what they can read in English translation, and also what kind of ideas they can expect coming out of today's Ukrainian literature. And if you have any questions about what you have heard right now, please leave them in the comments. Or you can always go to my blog at clarissasblog.com, leave any questions there, and I will be happy to answer them. Thank you so much for listening. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. Nothing excites me more than being able to talk about literature. There's just nothing in life that gets me going like literature gets me going. And I'm very grateful to everybody who participates, and especially grateful to anybody who's going to leave any questions for me. Thank you.